maybe it's time we focus less on how someone says we become an entitlement society than address the fact that we are an entitlement society, period. And who knows that better than the man who decades ago warned of this growing and very pricey nanny state, conservative thinker, best-selling author, and the man many have called the very heart and soul of the conservative movement itself, Thomas Sowell. Mr. Sowell, good to have you.
Good being here.
I always think, Thomas, that we get it backwards, that we're all getting our nose out of joint about whose nose is out of joint, but not addressing the indisputable fact that 47% pay no income taxes. More than ever, we're seeing people on the government dole, some genuinely, many not, and it's out of control. What do you think of that?
Well, I think, contrary to what some Republicans seem to think, that's not a negative for the president when the election comes. These are people who are very likely to vote for him. I mean, Franklin D. Roosevelt showed that you could have an economic disaster bigger than this one, and yet win an election in a landslide at the end of his first term.
And he did so because we hadn't gotten out of that depression. We were still in a very deep recession. But, you know, a lot of people by then were on the public dole. The argument that Mitt Romney was raising was that that's what happens in entitlement society. Those who are getting the entitlements remember the guy providing them. But this food stamp thing today is a startling development, is it not? I do want you to react to something Jack Welch mentioned about this entitlement mess with me a short while ago on Fox News. Listen to this. Do you think when voters go to the polls, whatever these polls are saying today, there's an inflection by which they say, we're tired of this?
We don't want to live in this economy. We want to live in a vibrant, growing economy where our children, and where we have safety nets, but the safety nets are paid for from taxes that are created from jobs.
What do you think of that?
Well, I mean, the question, safety net. The question: at what point does a safety net become a hammock? And I'm afraid that's where we are. I was shocked to learn within the past year that the government sends people into supermarkets to tell shoppers that there are food stamps available. I mean, clearly, this administration understands that that's politically where it's at.
How did we get to 47%? Not paying any income taxes? And I know the ones who are paying payroll taxes. I know those who are genuinely poor. But in the 80s, early 80s, it was in the 20s. And this thing keeps going up and up and up. So the only way to get more money with the government, I guess, is to hike taxes on the rich. But the math doesn't look good.
Well, first of all, raising the tax rate on the rich in no way translates into acquiring more government revenue. I mean, all kinds of statistics, not only from this country, from other countries, Iceland and India come to mind. When the state of Maryland raised a high tax on millionaires left Maryland, and Maryland collected less tax revenue at the high tax rate than it had at the lower tax rate.
What do we do then? I mean, we live in a world now where some, not all, but countries like France are lifting the top rate to, 75%. And a number of premier CEOs in that country have left. So it's following this theme you mentioned, but it does seem to be the way, not of the entire world, but of a lot of it. What's happening?
Well, it's the way of the part of the world that is having riots because they can't sustain the welfare state. Now, we're not at that point yet, but I think we can get there in one more term of Obama.
What should Mitt Romney be advocating, Thomas? I mean, the rap against him is he's got a good intellectual argument, but he doesn't have the passion to present it, or he's just muddying the message. Jack Welch said, just go right out there and espouse the virtues of capitalism and how great it is. Don't hide from it. Wrap your arms around it and sell it. What do you say?
Well, I think it's one thing to explain things in plain English that ordinary people can easily understand. I don't think he needs to rant and carry on. I don't remember Ronald Reagan ranting. He just went out there and made the case, and he won 2 landslide elections. So you don't want Romney or anyone else to be something that they're not. He's not, who was this doctor that the Democrats had that carried on? So he's not that kind of person. And I think for him to try to pretend to be something that he's not would only hurt him. But I think he does need to explain explicitly exactly what it is and why he believes what he does. And I think that's sufficient. I mean, we're not looking for a buddy-in-chief in the White House.
Yeah. But we also are looking for someone who can outline where we're going to be, right? Where we are and where we're going to be. And Jack Welch and others have talked about how the country we wanted to look in 2014, in 2016, in 2020. That, in other words, the direction is going to look better under me than under my opponent. But what does Romney do to do that?
Well, he simply explains himself, which most Republicans don't do. He seems to be doing a little bit of that now, and he makes a few slip-ups. But, it's better to make a few slip-ups telling the truth than it is to go out there and try to present something that looks phony to the viewers.
I'm not in your league historian-wise when I go back in economic history here, but I did study how the media was covering the 1980 presidential race with Ronald Reagan and Jimmy Carter, and the same disdainful, even dismissive comments made of Mitt Romney today were very much in vogue back then as well, and Jimmy Carter was a much less popular president. It could explain why those two were virtually even in the polls almost up to Election Day itself. But the argument against Ronald Reagan, I'll let you finish that point, but was that he would be dangerous. Much is said the same of Mitt Romney. How to address that?
I don't think Mitt Romney is going to be sparking riots against American embassies around the world.
That's interesting. But they still hate us around the world, no matter who's our president, don't they? I mean, in that part of the world particularly, I think you could be Mother Teresa, and they wouldn't love you, right?
Well, it's not a question of whether they love you or not. The question is whether they respect you. I'm sure the Iranians did not love Ronald Reagan, but the fact is they made it their business to get those hostages loose before Ronald Reagan took the oath of office. In fact, hours before Ronald Reagan took the oath of office.
You have heard now that conservatives have to answer the charge that they're insensitive or callous. They don't care for the poor. They don't care for the starving. And I almost feel that conservatives are gun shy. They're afraid of who they want to be, and they're afraid of their own DNA. I don't think I'm imagining that. I see it, and it's like they're always nervous. What do you think?
Undoubtedly, I think that's one of the reasons they don't come out and say what they want to say. I don't think there's anything calloused about wanting able-bodied men to work. What I think is truly calloused is having a system and a set of policies that in fact hurts the poor. I mean, you mentioned Reagan. I came across an old yellow copy of the New York Times, which had the front page headline that the black-white income difference had narrowed slightly during the 1980s. Now, that's the Reagan administration. More recently, the black-white income difference has widened greatly under Barack Obama. And yet Reagan is never regarded as being someone who's for the poor or whatnot, and Obama is. So the real question is not how does he talk, how does he come across? The question is what do his policies do to people? And I think, for example, minimum wages, I was shocked to hear Romney say he'd be for it. Minimum wages have done enormous damage to young blacks. If you go back to the mid 1940s, the unemployment rate among black teenagers was a fraction of what it has been, and it was a fraction in 1949, which was a recession year, of what it has been in even the most prosperous years since then. And the difference was that in 1949, the minimum wage law had not been upgraded since 1938. So for all practical purposes, it had been destroyed by inflation. Once you started reinstating the minimum wage with increases, then you began to get the 20, 30, 40% unemployment rate among black teenagers. But in the late 40s, there were years when black 16-year-olds had unemployment rates under 10%. Now, the question is not whether you are empathizing or not. The question is whether your policies are ruining people.
Do you believe these polls, Tom, when you look at them all, that invariably show the president ahead and battleground states ahead? in an economy that certainly doesn't look to me like it's firing on all cylinders. Do you believe them?
Well, I believe the ones that take likely voters rather than all registered voters. But more than that, I don't believe that they're set in stone by any stretch. Actually, Karl Rove pointed out that at one point Jimmy Carter was leading Ronald Reagan 47% to 39%, and yet Reagan won in a landslide. So these things, everything depends on what people are going to do from here on out. And I think especially the debates.
Yeah, the debates were crucial for Ronald Reagan, right? Because it was only one, and it was the Sunday before, not the immediate election, but the prior Sunday, that just turned that on its head. Finally, this idea that, let's say the president is reelected, big government continues. There are a lot of conservatives who say, oh, the country's finished, you might as well pack it up. Capitalism, as we know it, is gone. The entitlement society will be etched in stone. Democrats will have a lock on power because so many will be indebted to them. Do you agree with that?
No, heavens, I think that, don't forget, Reagan rolled some things back. I mean, it was the only time I know of when the size of the Federal Register declined. And of course, that's where all the new laws and new regulations appear. And that was the only time that they were rolled back. So things can be rolled back.
Is Mitt Romney Ronald Reagan?
No, nobody's Ronald Reagan. If we're waiting for Ronald Reagan, it may be another 50 or so years.
Is Barack Obama Jimmy Carter?
I think Barack Obama is worse than Jimmy Carter.
Do you?
Yes. Carter had many foolish policies internationally as well as domestically. But I think Obama has outdone him in both respects.
Well, Thomas Sowell, always good seeing you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thomas Sowell.